Good afternoon. Welcome to today's training. So today we are going to look at another very important topic, which has to do with environmental assessment. And today we are going to discuss investment, cumulative impact assessments, and mitigation. That is in the context of environmental management. And cumulative impact assessment is a very important assessment, most especially which has to do with assessing the impacts of a developmental project when you have several projects that are being carried out within a particular area, and the cumulative impact of all these projects is what is being assessed as a cumulative impact assessment of this developmental project. So, as background to this topic, the major environmental and social management challenges that we face today, which includes climate change, loss of biodiversity, scarcity of usable fresh water resources.
They should show your
of activities that are individually significant, but together have had regional or even global repercussion. So what this tells us that individual projects could be insignificant in terms of the risk or the impact which they pose to the social and the environmental component. But when they are combined, when you have several of these projects combined within an area, it will lead to a significant impact on the environment. Furthermore, assessment of and management of environmental and social risks, as well as impact, recognizes that because of the increasing significance of this risk, the risks that I mentioned earlier, like the climate change, the loss of biodiversity and all that, such factors, which include the climate change, water availability, decline of species biodiversity, degradation of the ecosystem, among others, Cumulative impact assessment and management is an essential framework for risk management. So cumulative impact assessment is very important in managing the risk as a result of the impact of projects on this environmental and social component. And generally, the most ecological, devastating environmental effects and subsequent social consequences may result not from the direct effect of a particular action or project. It could be from the combination of existing stresses, that is the impact of a project on the environment, and the individually minor effects of multiple actions over time. So individual stress from projects in terms of emissions into the air, effluent released into the water body, which contaminate the soil, all these individual combination stress, when combined with effects from other projects within an area, leads to multiple action, and which could be classified as cumulative impacts when it has to do with environmental assessment. So now let's look at the concept of cumulative impact assessment. Although environmental and social impact assessments, which is the a larger, more broader stage of assessing the environmental impact process, is essential to assessing and managing environmental and social impact of individual projects. It is often maybe insufficient for identifying and managing incremental impacts on areas or resources used or indirectly affected by a given development from other existing land or reasonable defined development. The time and the risk and impact are usually identified with the duration of this project. So cumulative effects to changes, cumulative effect refers to changes to the environment that are caused by action in other parts, past, present, and future action. So all the actions that result of a developmental project, whether it is happening presently or in the past or in the future, when are combined together, could be termed cumulative effect and will be assessed under cumulative impact assessment of this project. So according to the U.S. Council on Environmental Quality, cumulative effects assessment, which is we also say as a term as cumulative impact assessment, is the impact on the environment which results from the incremental impacts of the action when added to their past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future action. So we have to have a way of predicting the future actions or impacts that are associated with the project, and this will help us to assess properly the cumulative impacts of the past risk, the present risk of the project, and the foreseeable risk, which will definitely have an impact on the environment and the social component of the environment within a project area. So in terms of looking at cumulative impacts, types or scenario, how do we now classify a project, or how do we look at cumulative impact in terms of the nature of the project? So cumulative impacts encompass a broad spectrum of impacts at different spatial and temporal scales. That means impacts of the result of projects in terms of cumulative impact occurs at a different level, at a different scale. In terms of the area of coverage, will be a small area of coverage or a wide area of coverage, and temporal in the sense that it has to do with the timing. This impact occurs at different times, considering the seasonal effects of the project on the environment. So this cumulative impact encompasses this broad spectrum, which covers the spatial, that is the extent, and the temporal, which has to do with the timing of the project. It could occur because of a series of projects of the same type being developed, or from the combined effect over a given resource from a mix of different types of projects. So those are the two basically scenarios that we could look at when it has to do with cumulative impact, where in terms of a project of the same type that is being developed within a particular area. For instance, maybe you have a certain power plant that has been developed within a particular area, and another company or another decide to set up maybe 2 or 3 power plants within that area, considering the climatic condition and other favorable conditions that could be favor the siting of a power plant within that area. And also leveraging on the infrastructure, which a project has already set up, which a setting of a project has within that area. It could lead to multiple projects coming within that area. And this project of the same type could lead to cumulative impact, which has to be assessed. Also, on the other hand, cumulative impact could be from a combination effect of given resources, or maybe in terms of different projects that are combining, that are being they are coming up as a result of one project within an area. So these different projects will result in cumulative impact of the project. So in terms of the nature of this project, it could be in terms of, like I mentioned earlier, several hydroelectric projects that are constructed or planned on the same river or within the same watershed. You have a hydroelectric project, which of course will result to damping of this river, and setting up of these projects along in the same river course will have a cumulative impact. And this impact has to be assessed even considering the future projects that could still be constructed within these water channels to have an impact on the resources within that area. And it is necessary that cumulative impact is being carried out to assess the risk of this project on this water course. Another example of multiple projects of the same type which could result in cumulative impact is multiple oil and gas projects or mines that are developed in close proximity. So if you have different oil and gas projects or mining activity that are developed within a close area, it could have an impact on the environment, even the social component of the environment, and it's necessary that cumulative impact of this project is being carried out to assess the present and the future risk of this project within the environment. And also, we could look at it in terms of the number of wind farms that are constructed or planned within the same region. You have wind towers that is used to generate power within a particular area. This is a project of the same type, but several of it within that area could result in cumulative impacts on the environment. Then, on the other hand, when it has to do with projects of different categories within an area, if you look at it in terms of the development of the mine sites, and this development of the mine site could also lead to creation of access roads within that area. Also, you could have a transmission line that is being set up that is being constructed within that area, and other adjacent land use that are being developed within that area. So the combined effects of all these projects could have a resultant effect on the environmental and social component, which necessitates the carrying out of cumulative impact assessment on this project. Cumulative impact also could be in terms of incremental noise from a number of separate developments, could be in terms of combined effect of individual impacts, that is in terms of the noise, dust, and visual impact from one development on a particular receptor. Receptor there could be in terms of the human, the biodiversity, or the infrastructure within an area. And also several developments which with a significant impact, which individually, but which together have cumulative effects, could also be seen as impact project that has cumulative impact on the environment. An example of this is in terms of development of a golf course, which may have an insignificant impact. But when considered with several nearby golf courses that could be, this could be result in significant cumulative impact on the local ecology and landscape of that region. So it could happen that a single project within an area may not have a significant impact, but it's at the time the environmental and social impact assessment was carried out. But by the time we now have additions of these projects that have been set up within that area, it is necessary to look at the cumulative impact of these projects in this area, which will now necessitate the carrying out of cumulative impact assessment. So what are the processes of implementing a cumulative impact assessment? How do we go about carrying out a cumulative impact assessment? These stages are similar to what we have when we are carrying out an environmental and social impact assessment, but with some modifications. And the first step in terms of implementing a cumulative impact assessment has to do with the scoping, which also is very important stage when you are carrying out your environmental and social impact assessment. And this step is critical to the successful cumulative impact assessment because it establishes the scope of the analysis of the cumulative impact. It will give you an idea to the extent to which you have to identify the impact and how the extent to which you have to analyze the impact from this project. And this stage aims to identify and agree on the valuable environmental components, valuable environmental component, which have to do with like the environmental component of your project, such as the biophysical, the biodiversity, the soil, the water, in terms of surface and groundwater. All these are valuable environmental components, and this is done in consultation with stakeholders. Stakeholders are very important, like the community people, the experts that are involved, the NGOs, the governments, the regulatory bodies. All these people have to be consulted in terms of carrying out the scoping of the cumulative impact, in terms of assessing the cumulative impact of a project. You may not have an idea of to the extent which this project may have, the impact this project may have on the environment, but when all these stakeholders are involved, it will give you an idea, and their input will give you a basis to having a standard scoping information, which will now prompt you to identify the various impacts or risk of this project and how to analyze this impact and mitigate them. So, in determining the time frame for the analysis, you also have to establish the geographic scope of the analysis. In terms of the scoping, you have to establish the geographic scope of the analysis. To what extent geographically is the project going to have an impact on the environment? And it should involve an open, participatory, transparent, and meaningful consultation with affected communities. The affected communities have to be carried along. They should be engaged in an open, transparent manner. And at the start, that's at the beginning, all the potential effects that are identified as part of this project have to be listed. And this will have, after listing them out, you carry out a screening process which will now reduce them to the main impact that will have an impact on this project, and these are the impacts that actually analysis will be carried out to mitigate the impact of this project on the environment. So the scoping is important in assessing the extent to which the analysis of the cumulative impact of the project will be carried out. Then we also have another scoping, which is the second phase of the scoping. And this one has to do with this purpose is has to do with this effect. The step is has to do with identifying the totality of the stresses that determine the condition of the valuable environmental components that have been selected for the cumulative impact assessment. And this includes identification of the sources of the stress, that is the stress, the risk of the project from the past developments whose impact may persist, and also looking at the existing development, and also looking at the foreseeable future development, as well as any other relevant external social or environmental drivers. Environmental drivers in terms of wildfires, droughts, predator interaction, that is in terms of biodiversity and human migration. So these are all external factors that could need to be assessed as part of the scoping phase of the cumulative impact assessment. So the stage in terms of implementing cumulative impact assessment has to do with establishing information, the baseline information of the valuable environmental components within that area, just like you will have baseline studies for your environmental and social impact assessment. And the availability of relevant data is critical for the success of cumulative impact assessment. And the methodology to be used also will help to determine the valuable environmental component baseline condition, which has to be defined as early as possible. So the valuable environmental components within the project has to be defined as early as possible in order for you to have an idea of the impact that the project will be having, and also be able to predict the impact, the cumulative impact of this project on the environment. And the data requirement should be determined early during the scoping phase. Like I said earlier, the first stage with the scoping, during the scoping phase, all the data, the requirements, information that you need has to be properly assessed. And one thing you have to know that typically the new baseline data to be collected for the cumulative impact assessment will not be as detailed as which has been generated during the environmental and social impact assessment, because the larger area covered and the changes in the type of data that's required for the different scales of the assessment. So because of the large area that is involved in terms of the cumulative impact assessment, the baseline data may be a little bit different from what you have when you have to do with environmental and social impact assessment. And the collection of a new baseline data tends to be limited and targeted to indicators that would allow determination of any changes in the valuable environmental conditions of the area. So the data information that you actually need in terms of carrying out a cumulative impact assessment are the indicators that will give you an information as to the changes that are taking place in the environment, changes in terms of the biodiversity. Maybe you discover that there are some plants are wilting, the growth of the vegetation has been stunted, or discover that the quality of the soil in terms of the chemicals has increased. So these are indicators that you could use and direct your attention to as a way of understanding the baseline condition or predicting the future effects, cumulative impact of a project within an area. Also, for an example of this is that during environmental and social impact assessment, intensive and detailed field survey of the soil, maybe the vegetation and the fauna may be required in order to assess the direct impact of these projects on the different environmental components. But looking at the cumulative impact assessment, it may require expanding the geographical boundary, considering that we are now having different projects or increase in the impact or the risk of this project. We can now have an expansion in the geographical boundary to thousands of hectares, and the analysis of this impact could involve the use of satellite imagery because of the large extent of the area that is being covered. And this will also help you in understanding the existing vegetation and the fauna within that area. So the area of coverage, when it has to do with baseline information in terms of the cumulative impact assessment, is wider or larger compared to the environmental impact and social impact assessment that was carried out at the beginning of the project. So the fourth stage in terms of implementing the cumulative impact assessment has to do with assessing the cumulative impact on the valuable environmental components. And it involves identifying potential environmental and social impact and their risk. Also, it also involves assessing expected impacts as the potential change in condition of this valuable environmental components. That is, in terms of maybe the viability or the sustainability of the valuable environmental components. The potential changes is one way of assessing the cumulative impact of a project on the valuable environmental component. Now also it has to do with identifying any potential additive or synergetic effect, that is combination of different effects or different risk impacts on the environment. Also, as a way of assessing the cumulative impacts on the valuable environmental component, the analysis of the cumulative impacts on this valuable environmental component involves estimating the future state of these valuable environmental components that may result from the impact that they experience from various stages of the project development. So based on the various stages of the development, the analysis of this cumulative impact will involve estimating the future states of this environmental component within the project area. And furthermore, the assessment of this cumulative impact aims to estimate the state of the valuable environmental components as it results from the aggregation of the different stresses that affect this environmental component within this area. And the addition of this stress, that is the effect or impact on the this environmental component that is being imposed by these projects, leads to the deterioration of this component within the environment. So the fifth stage in implementing the cumulative impact assessment has to do with assessing the significance of a predicted cumulative impact. So we have to look at this, the significance of the impact that has been predicted as a result of a cumulative impact of several projects within an area. And the assessment of this significance has to do with defining the appropriate threshold and indicators. It also has to do with determining the impacts and the risks that are significant in the context of the past, present, and future action. So all the actions that have been carried out within as a result of the project could help to determine the impact of this project within our environment. And the threshold that I mentioned earlier has to do with the limits beyond which changes that are resulting from cumulative impact that become as a concern. So once you have the impact from a project that have gone to a limit that could be that could raise concern, you could now look at it that the project, the level of this impact has gone beyond the threshold, and it's a need for us to assess the significance of this project. And also, You can look at it in terms of the significance is typically evaluated at the project mitigation, after the project mitigation measures have been factored in. So after you must have factored in the mitigations or the different mitigation measures, maybe in terms of reducing the impact, trying to avoid the impact, or try to eliminate the impact. The residual impact is now what we now use to measure the significance of the impact, the cumulative impact on the environment, and which we now need to further mitigation measures or management of this cumulative impact. And the significance of the cumulative impact is evaluated not in terms of the amount of change, but in terms of the results of the impact to the vulnerability and to the sustainability of the valuable environmental component. So that is how you assess the significance of the project. It's the actual way of measuring the vulnerability of this, the significance of this impact on the environment. Then the sixth way of step in terms of implementation of the cumulative impact assessment has to do with the management of the cumulative impact itself. That's in terms of the design and the implementation of the management approach to the cumulative impact assessment. And this involves using approach like the mitigation hierarchy, designing of management strategy to address significant cumulative impacts on the environmental components. It also involves engaging of other parties that are needed for effective collaboration or coordination of the impact assessment. It also involves proposing mitigation and monitoring program, as well as managing uncertainties with informed adaptive management. So as a way of managing the cumulative impact of a project, these processes have to properly be integrated in the design and implementation of the management of the cumulative impact of a project. And the management measures need to prevent cumulative impacts that are needed to prevent cumulative impact will depend on the context in which the development of this impact occur. That is in terms of the impact from projects, whether it is in terms of impact from other projects or natural drivers like drought or changes in rainfall pattern. And it also depends on the characteristics of the development impact. So those are what would inform the management measures that you adopt for the management of the cumulative impact from projects. So what are the expected outcomes from a cumulative impact? After carrying out your cumulative impact, what do we have as a way, as information in terms of the result of the carrying out cumulative impact assessment? So the expected outcome of a good cumulative impact assessment includes the identification of all the valuable environmental components that may be affected by the development under evaluation. And also it could be informed of identification of all other existing and reasonable, anticipated, or planned impact that's been induced as a result of the project, and also as well as natural, environmental, and external social drivers. Another outcome could be in terms of assessments or estimation of the future conditions of the selected valuable environmental component as a result of the cumulative impact that this project is expected to have. And when combined with those of other reasonable predictable development, this will give you a better idea of the cumulative impact of a project. So in terms of mitigation of this cumulative impact, how do you mitigate the impact, the cumulative impact of several projects that you have within our environment? So this approach is similar to what we have in terms of carry out environmental and social impact assessment. And mitigation of this cumulative impact refers to a sequence of considerations that is designed to help manage the adverse environmental impact or risks from projects within the area, and they include approach like avoidance, that is avoiding the adverse environmental impact altogether. It will also be in terms of minimization, that's limiting the degree or the magnitude of the adverse impact. It will be in terms of the reduction, that is gradually eliminating the adverse impact over time, that is through preservation and maintenance of the operations within, during the lifespan of the project. And it could be in terms of offsetting, that is undertaking activities that counterbalance the adverse and residual environmental impact of these projects on the environment. So in conclusion, as a critical factor to the success of cumulative impact assessment, the individual project mitigation and information that's needed for the mitigation of impact of a project could be a major strategy to implement a successful cumulative impact assessment. And the management approach to the implementation of cumulative impact assessment needs to be adaptive, which involves monitoring of both the impact and effectiveness of the management approach, and also adjusting the management to ensure that avoidance of unacceptable cumulative impact on the project is ensured. And also, cumulative impact identified from project development is better managed by integrating its management into the project environmental management plan and strategy, just like you will have in terms of your environmental and social impact assessment. So thank you for listening to this training. If you have any questions, please make use of the chat box and we address that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ukeme-Yellow, for that extensive presentation on cumulative impact assessment, the mitigation, and its context in environmental management. We really appreciate you have been able to deal with it properly, taking us through the definition of those terminologies, and still as far as going through the process of conducting cumulative impact assessment and then capping it up with the expected outcomes after conducting this cumulative impact assessment. Quite a number of questions have been rolling in while you were making your presentation. But before I read one of the questions to you, our participants, there is a poll being displayed on your screen right now. I would like each and every one of us to check it and fill it accordingly. There are 3 questions in the poll, and the essence is to test and check out for and feel the pulse, most especially of our participants, so that we can serve you better another time and bring up training topics that are very, very much relevant to your area of specialization. So in the next maybe 2 minutes, I will leave the poll on to go around while we attend to the question. Yes, our presenter, we received a question from one Olu. Actually, at the beginning of this training, we are expected to name ourselves properly so that we will know the organization that we are from or the country that we have joined this training from, so that we can answer you accordingly and we can address you appropriately. But nevertheless, we have a question here from Olu, and the question is, what are the VEX? You know, during the course of your presentation, you mentioned quite a number of times VEX, 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 VEX. So this person would like to know what we mean by VEX. I will hand over to you now, Mr. Ukeme, to attend to that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Olu, for that question. So, in terms of your question, you're asking about what is VEX and what they are. So, VEX are valuable environmental components. Valuable environmental components, and they are environmental and social attributes. That they have environmental and social component of attributes that are considered to be important in addressing the risk of impact of a project on the environment. And they may be in terms of the physical features, that's the habitat, the wildlife population, it could be the ecosystem services, it could be the natural process like the water body you have within the environment, it could be the social condition in terms of the health and the socioeconomic conditions, it could be the cultural aspects. So those are the valuable environmental components, which gives you an idea as to if you want to measure the risk of a project on the environment. Those are the things that you use to assess the risk of a project on the environment. So I hope you now have an idea of what we are talking about when you refer to valuable environmental components. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that brief and concise response. I hope our participants is
You read it. Okay, sorry for the glitch network. I understand some of you could not hear us again. So we have a couple of questions here, and there's a question from Ralph Emma from Restore Nature Concept, and he's asking that most building projects have left very important, valuable environmental components such as vegetation, that is the shrubs and the trees, largely absent. And oftentimes these have been left in the hands of architects. So he's asking what measures can we take to ensure vegetation is adequately represented in building projects. Thank you very much, Raphael Emma. Actually, this measure has to be carried out right from the inception when carried out environmental and social impact assessment of the project. And this is one of the mitigation measures that we usually recommend that has to be incorporated as a way of managing the biodiversity or the vegetation within an area. where you have projects that is supposed to be sited in a particular area, it is advisable that you only clear a particular area to the extent of which you are going to be siting your infrastructure, where maybe you have a factory or you have an area that you want to set up a plant. It is advisable that you clear within that area and allow the vegetation, the natural vegetation that you have within that area to continue to sustain the natural environment there. And also, you could also supplement that with planting further trees, and most especially indigenous trees that will support the natural biodiversity within that area. So, also coming up with a biodiversity management plan, which will help in managing the biodiversity during the operational phases of this project, would help in maintaining or sustaining these valuable environmental components that usually destroyed during coming up with projects. So I hope I'll be able to address your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess we had a minor technical glitch. Thank you very much for staying with us up to this very moment. We hope you join us next time in our series of presentation, and then it will be of great benefit to you. If there are further questions or comments about our trainings, you can contact us at info@richflood.com, and be rest assured that we will respond to you accordingly. We have other trainings that will be coming up in the month of September, in the month of October, in the month of December, and we have series of panel discussion. You can join us and be a part of our panel discussion as well, and we believe that you would have a great time being a part of our series. Thank you once again for attending.